And we did not find out the actual island's name until just a couple of days after we left Saipan, where the island was actually located. And when they told Iwo Jima, it was all strange, and we did not know where it was. Literally, I had never heard of the island before. It was a very small island, yet it was a possession, actually was Japanese soil. It was their homeland, and this was going to be the first invasion of that homeland. So as we traveled at many miles and many days aboard the carrier, and we landed on Iwo Jima, and not knowing what the objective was other than we were to take the island, and we didn't realize it would be so heavily fortified. We'd been told originally we would take the island in 3 days, but I went in on D-Day, and it was 38 days before I left the island. But I'm leading up to tell you this, that we didn't know why we invaded. We didn't understand why it was so heavily fortified and so heavily defended. And actually, we didn't find that out until after they secured the battle. But the one reason was that the B-29s were leaving Saipan Tinian for actual raids on Japan proper itself. And so that the 29s going up to Japan encountered the fighters from Iwo Jima. And many of them, I'm sure, suffered physical damage and hindered them from maybe even carrying on in their attack plan. But also in coming back, they were to come near Iwo Jima, and they faced the enemy again, and many of them were crippled. As a result, I did not realize at the time that there were many of those aircraft were lost with their crew. I understand there was something like 14 men that were a crew on those B-29s. And when one of those went down, they lost the crews, and the toll was very heavy. But I wanted to say, when after I got on Iwo Jima, we were there, I would say probably 2 weeks or so. Motoyama number 1, which is one of the airfields that the Japanese flew their fighters from. It was secured, and actually a new runway were fixed so they could land. And I never forget this one day I saw this B-29 coming back very low over the island. I looked up, and it was 2 inches out, as I remember, and there was a hole in the wing. It was a mammoth big hole. You could see daylight to the other side. But that was the first B-29 that was able to land on Iwo Jima. And as a result, at the time, we did not realize that was one of our main purposes of taking that island, because they had suffered tremendous loss in not only aircraft, but also in the air crew itself. So I guess the mission that we went through and the battle we fought was, in essence, it was something that was very helpful to the furtherance of the war effort in that island. And so I guess today I realize what I didn't know back then. I knew the fighting was very heavy. I thought it was just another battle, but we found out later it was one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. But I just thought it was another campaign. So I feel that many of our efforts were not in vain, because we had lost a great number of lives. But I was told later that the number of lives that were saved on the 29s compensated for those lives that were lost there. I realize it's not a fair trade-off. You can't compare those two things, but I'm glad that it wasn't in vain, that there was a blessing and a benefit to those aircraft carriers.
Absolutely. So what were you doing? You said you were laying down. Were you trying to sleep?
Well, in all probability, I can't say for sure it was lying down. I know I looked up, a lot of times we would lay down for cover, and so we wouldn't be exposed. I don't think at that time, I may have been in a foxhole, I'm not sure. If it was in some place where I had some protection, because I know I could look up when I heard this aircraft coming, and I saw what I related to you earlier. So at that time, I don't remember where I was in a foxhole. I may have been lying down or sitting down or something.
So speaking of sleep, how did you guys sleep on the island, or what was trying to sleep like?
Well, I think one of my worst nights on the island was when we went in on D-Day. We only made it several hundred yards in to the island because the resistance was so heavy that the troops could not advance to their predestined area where they were supposed to achieve the first day. And I remember we dug in, and that afternoon, not too long after we landed, that the shells started raining in. The Japanese had tremendous artillery. The first night that I was there, I think that was one of my first nights, the worst that I had on Iwo, because we were constantly under artillery fire. All night long, you hear this artillery shell screaming coming in. You just stiffened yourself waiting for that instant that one was going to take you out of the life of this world. But I remember that there was one that hit so close that literally it blew sand all over me, and I think literally I was almost taken out of my foxhole, and I felt a burning in my right arm, and I thought I was hit by shrapnel, and I grabbed my arm to feel it. I grabbed a hold of this shriveled piece of artillery shell. It was very ragged, and I burnt my hand even grabbing it. I threw it away. Hear what happened when a piece of that shrapnel had fallen in and hit me and burned. And I remember that after that, my ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything. So that was one that really was very, very close, but they kept it all night long. About every 2 or 3 minutes seemed like one of the shells. And then there were mortar shells dropping it also. I think of all my times on Iwo Jima, I was just paralyzed that night. Fear that I would not make it through the night.
So did you have a foxhole companion?
Yes, I had dug it. That was one of the things when we got so far in, we were told to dig in the hold where we were, because it seemed that the advancement had stagnated and we could only go so far because the resistance was so heavy. And it was kind of a volcanic ash. It was very easy to dig a foxhole because it was very loose, like sand and whatever it was.
Can you compare that to something like, I've heard it commonly referred, not commonly, but I've heard it referred to as like coffee grounds. Is that a good comparison?
Well, that's something. That was the black sand. In fact, I have a sample over here I'll show you later. It's a sample from the sand of Iwo Jima, but up on the mount where we were, there was just, I don't know where it was, volcanic ash. It was just something loose. I remember that. It was very easy to dig the foxhole in, and that's where we dug in, down where we could stay.
Did it have a smell at all to it?
I can't remember that. I don't know. Now I know that there was an odor on the island was different than something, whether it was the sand or the dirt, or of course we know it was like a sulfur segment that where they had vents that explored the sand, and not the sand but the odor of sulfur, and steam like would come up. But at that first part we didn't really have that. We ran into that later on in the island because we were down at the end near Mount Suribachi.
So Mount Suribachi, that was the south end of the island?
Yeah, it was behind us maybe, I'm going to guess, I don't know, maybe 500 to 900 feet, maybe a little further. But you could look right back, and I know in the foxhole you look up and you can see Suribachi. And I might also say this, while we were there, I looked back and I saw these aircraft bombers. They would dive bomb and drop bombs right on the Mount Suribachi. And then I also saw the planes, they dropped these were fire bombs. Really what they were filled with gel and gasoline. And when they hit the ground, they just splatter everywhere and flame it everywhere. But those Japanese were inside caves, and this didn't hurt them a bit. And then I saw a cruiser one day come alongside with his 5-inch guns. He fired point blank into that Mount Suribachi. But it seemed like those defenses we had did very little to destroy them. So it just was a matter that Suribachi was the key to the invasion, because Suribachi was an observation point where they could direct fire from up above, see up to Katana Point on the other end of the island. It was it must have been almost 5 miles, and they were shelling artillery from that end, and we didn't know where it was coming from because their artillery was hidden in caves and things.
Okay. So, we mentioned about Foxhole Buddy. Do you remember his name? That guy that you dug in with that was responsible?
Well, he was
for
in a
watching-
foxhole next to me. I'm trying to think. I think his name was. I think it was his name was Norman. When we got there, he was. I heard him carrying on. He was vomiting like crazy, and I asked him. I called. I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yes." But apparently, I never got sick myself. But I know a lot of guys would get sick from what they saw, and this. I guess fear is what caused them to vomit.
So, when you dug in, what were some of your first orders like? You had mentioned previously that you would go to the front and do some observation.
Yeah, this was later on. At the first days, I didn't go because we were actually the front line itself. They told us to dig in, get the hold where we're at, because the fear was, the Japanese in previous invasion, they did what they call banzai charges. That's where they get all drunk on sake, and then they would banzai hundreds of it. But they didn't do that. The General Kurabashi, he was wise enough to know that we had the weaponry and artillery and machine gun fire that would wipe them out.
Mm-hmm.
So they never actually pulled a banzai charge there. But that was one of the fears that we had the first time, because in previous engagements, this is one of the tactics they used. This is where really John Basilone won the Congressional Medal of Honor on the Guadalcanal, because he was there that night when there was something like, I don't know how many Japanese charged, but I understand, was told later that he took this machine gun, 30 caliber machine gun, and he killed some 40-some Japanese soldiers because they were charged that. So this was a common thing back there, but they realized later this was only defeating their purpose, because they stayed in. You hardly saw one of them. Only once in a while you'd see one move around, but they pretty much stayed in those pillbox and caves.
You brought up a buzzword, Manila John Basilone. Did you ever see him or ever talk to him or anything?
No, I never had the privilege. I heard of him. He was in, I think it was the 27th Regiment. I think he was in, I may have been 1st or 2nd Battalion. I think C Company is what he was in. It was a machine gun platoon he was in. But I had heard of John, and when you have I guess a hero, we call him, like that really gave up his wonderful life that he had back here. If I say it's a wonderful life, he was selling war bonds and had life made that was not satisfied. He wanted to go back into service. And I think his life was exemplary for us that knew of him, that we admired the bravery that he had. I think he was a perfect example for one to set his ideals on a Marine. I don't know that I ever would have had the courage he had, but he was a special man.
So when he got killed, was there like a wave of news that kind of came through that said that, or?
I don't recall what I heard it. He was killed on D-Day, I know that. I found out later, but I can't remember the exact date when the news got to us. And I don't know how he got killed. I read in that book of that you gave me there, Red Blood and Black Sand. And there's, I kind of gathered that he went back to get reinforcements, and I think that's when he got killed. It may have been a mortar shell because he's under heavy mortar fire. I'm not sure but irregardless, he was one that gave his life for the battle.
Okay.
I'm sure he saved many lives because of his bravery he did there on the island itself.
Mm-hmm. So while you guys were on the island, did the Japanese did they have any propaganda towards you guys? Did they ever yell anything at you, or anything like that? Or
I don't recall them ever yelling at us. The only propaganda that I heard was before we got there on the radio that they had a lady called Tokyo Rose. And she was always, if they could find a name, that's why it was very important not to leave anything. She'd tell us, so and so, you're there. We think of you, and you ought to your wife back home, or your girlfriend. It was just a lot of propaganda. But I don't remember what was said. But I was a young single boy, and I was never really involved. But it was just demoralized the troops.
Did it actually work at all? I mean, did you know of anybody that kind of questioned, or was it just in one ear and out the other, over the head?
No. As far as I know, the guys that I know, they know was that they laughed a big joke. You know, I think later on, they had in Germany, they had one called Axis Sally. I think it's Germany. She broadcast to the troops in Germany. It was Axis Sally and Tokyo Rose. And then in the Vietnam War, if I recall, you know, one of the big anti-war one was Jane Fonda. She went and spoke at Hanoi. They called her Hanoi Jane. She was against us. She's been anti-war, and I just heard recently on television someplace where she raised up condemning our work over in Afghanistan and these foreign countries. Why this people in this own country could turn so much against our freedom, I can't understand that.
So, what was the weather like on Iwo?
Well, it seemed like it was always very gloomy. I know we had some rain there. Now, I don't know how much, I don't recall, but I know we rained. I don't know whether gloomy was because of all the smoke and everything. It just seemed like it was a very dark, dismal place. I can't actually remember the sun coming on and shining like, you know, full force. It may have been because of the smoke and everything was in the air, you know, I'm not sure. But it was just kind of a dismal place as I remember. And there was anything attractive about it. There was nothing there that showed life or anything like that. When I'm talking life, trees or vegetation, after the bombardment and the saturation that it took previously to the invasion, it just seemed like they destroyed everything on the surface.
Was Iwo completely uninhabited prior to the invasion? Were there any native people that lived there at all?
See, I don't know when this took place, probably before the war. This was a possession for the Japanese. I understand that they had communication radar things there on the island. Now the Japanese started to fortify it, I don't know when. And I understand they brought a lot of Korean laborers to do the work, digging the caves and building fortifications and digging the tunnels and things. But I heard one time there was a little village up there, and of course, after the bombardment, it wasn't there. And I understand, now I may be wrong, all these civilians had been removed from the island. Now who was there or what? I know that there was evidence of people. I know one of the guys in one of the outfits found a bicycle somewhere on the island, I don't know. You know, the Japanese, I remember they had a flashlight. I didn't have one, but you squeeze a handle, had like a little charger. That's how they made their light. Like had a little generator, you squeeze it.
Mm-hmm.
And I either saw pictures of it or was told about it. I can't remember now. But they had a lot of things there. But the Japanese, they were poorly dressed, poorly outfitted as far as I was concerned.
So, what made the Japanese so difficult? Was it just from the different spider holes and other stuff that they had around that they were just able to keep popping troops back up?
Well, they had these caves all over the island. In fact, I think it tells somewhere in some of the records, there was something like 800 caves and pillboxes on that. They would be in these caves. You couldn't always see. There was sometimes a pretty small opening, and they would stay in those caves. And sometimes they would come out behind the troops after you advanced on them, be over them. But the day that we left, which was officially several days after the island had been officially secured, we were down getting ready to load ship on the other side of the island to come back to our other camp. Why, that morning, a small arms fire broke out, and here the 5th Pioneer Battalion, which was down below us, they had broke out. The Japanese, I think there was something like 30 of them, had come out of these caves and got together, and they banzaied a charge into these tents where the Army pilots, the pilot 51s were. Now, I don't know how many were killed, but they shot all these Japanese that did that. But that proves that they were way back. This was long after the initial invasion that they come out of the cave. And I understand that even later, I forget, there was an account that I read somewhere where 2 of them come out of the cave and they'd been in there how many days. They had been on the island, were not discovered.
Mm-hmm. Can you get in a little bit of detail about what your role was?
Well, it seemed like that your responsibility changed from time to time, depending on the circumstance. But we were ordered to move out or whatever, like I told you the first day, we were ordered to dig in, and then the next time we were ordered to move out. And we ordered to go this way, that they'd send a couple men or something to observe or to do something. It just, whatever the order was for your platoon leader, the officer, whatever they direct you to do. And that's one thing I think the Marine Corps taught their men, to be responsive and obedient to all commands, whether you agreed with it or not. I know just a lot of things that went on. There were times when the officers got killed, and even some of the corporals took over in the head of a company. So there was what they called field promotions. That's where the non-com men, maybe a sergeant or a corporal, you get a field promotion, you're a lieutenant, you take charge. That was what they called a field promotion. That happened quite often. Yeah, whenever all the officers got killed, they had to have leadership, and that's why they made them. You took over leading. Maybe you'd never done it before, but with the training you had, that was one of the parts that taught you to be a leader if you had to be.
Mm-hmm. Did any instances like that happen in your guys' unit or outfit or close to you guys at all that you were?
I don't recall that anybody with me had it, but I know there was some of the companies that were there. There was a hill, I think 382, that they tried to take, and I think one company, which was about 190 men, I think, if I remember, it was about 90% casualties. All the officers got killed. I remember the one case, it's in that book that I got from the division. It tells that this one, I think it was a corporal, he was made a lieutenant, second lieutenant field promotion, took over the leadership of the company. And then of course, when they went back, we had a lot of replacement regiments coming in with young recruits or young Marines, never been in combat before. They were assigned to these companies and outfits that had suffered tremendous cost. I always felt sorry for seeing these guys come in. I just thought, you guys don't know what you're getting into. But that was their purpose, that was the responsibility they had to replace men that had been killed or wounded, that wasn't no longer carried on their duties.
Was there ever a term used for like a lieutenant, it's like a 30-day wonder or a 90-day wonder?
Yeah, well, they called them 90-day wonders. These were young officers that they come out of OCS, Officers Candidate School, and they had no experience. And sometimes they get in outfits where a lot of the enlisted men had a lot of experience, maybe had been some in other battles, and they were brought in to lead and direct it. That's why they called them the 90-day wonders. So that they could be, usually it was either second lieutenant or first lieutenant. But I never really had any personal contact till after the war was over in Japan. That's something I'll tell you about later.
So do you recall any humorous event or something that you witnessed that you can't believe that happened?
The one time I remember came back and they said, oh, this was several days in there. They said, oh, you guys are gonna get a hot meal today. Well, we got a hot meal. we went to where they had a field kitchen set up. They had these great big round drums full of water, and they had a submersible thing with kerosene heater, made the water hot. You know what they had in it? Cans of sea ration. They warmed them up so we had a hot meal. That was some kind of, I say that was a big disappointment, also was a big joke.
What was like the temperature? You said it was like around 90 or something there, or it was pretty.
No, it wasn't all that hot. At night, it probably was. Oh, I'm trying. You know, that's hard to remember. It wasn't a tropical temperature. It wasn't really cold either. It was somewhere in between. I know the nights, sometimes you'd be cool at night, and we always had a blanket in our roll. We had a blanket roll we carried over that, and sometimes if you were back where you could get your blanket out, you'd use your blanket, kind of wrap up in it.
The guys that you served with, were there any nicknames? Like, did you have a nickname at all?
We all went by our last name in the service. They'd go out for roll call, they'd call your last name. You'd say, yo, you'd answer with them. I'll never forget this one time, I can't remember the date for sure. We were out for roll call. This is when we were back in Camp Pendleton. He yelled out, Smith! He said, the guy says, which one? There was more than one in there, but that was kind of a funny thing. But no, I didn't have any nicknames. I just can't remember that there was any nicknames. I'm sure there was, but I don't.
Okay. When you went in, what was like the ranking unit you were with? You were a private?
You mean when I joined the Marine Corps?
No. When you went onto Iwo, what was
I was already a corporal.
Okay, you were a corporal.
Yeah.
What unit did you serve with?
With the headquarters battalion, reconnaissance.
Okay, and then when you left, did you have the same rank in unit?
Yeah. I had the same rank till I was discharged.
Okay.
I got a little story to tell you about that when we get to it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, did you or anybody have like any close calls? Were there any close calls? I'm sure there was obviously lots of close calls.
But I remember it was near the end. I don't know, maybe the island was already officially just secured. I can't remember. Up on the north end of the island, I was ordered to go down with this lieutenant, get into the front lines, and we got into this like in a valley. It was rock cliffs all around. I'll never forget, there was this one large rock. We went across this open thing, and all at once a sniper picked up on us. And we dove behind this rock, and I thought for sure we was goners because, boy, I couldn't tell where the fire was coming from. It was close, not too far away. But after about 4 times, I said to this, let's get out of here because he's got us in his sight. But I remember, I thought, oh goodness, I went through everything now for me to get us too late. But that was probably, I know that I was definitely in the sights.
So he was firing at you guys.
Oh yes, because we were the only ones in the center. And where he was at in a cave apparently somewhere. See, these caves were all around us and everything. We were kind of in open territory. And but I remember that it was up pretty close to Katana Point. That was the furthest end of the island. That was a place where the Japanese committed suicide. They jump off that cliff. Maybe you read about that. They like I told you, some of them would commit it with a hand grenade. Some of them would jump off the cliff, kill themselves. But yeah, I think that was the last time. It was near the time before we left. I think, as I remember, I think the island, they officially declared it secured because we'd reached what they call the other end, the northern end of the island.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, I mean, there were some rounds that were very, very close. And I thought, oh, my heart started throbbing. I thought, oh, maybe I made it this far in the soul. I'm going to be able. That was probably my best recollection. There's a lot of other times that things were close, but My remembrance of that day was very clear. We boarded an LCI. They come in close, and I don't recall where we went through water or not. I don't recall that because I was so anxious to get off the island. I didn't. So we got aboard at LCI, and they took us out to the ship because the ships had to be out pretty far because on that side of the island it was pretty shallow. Where on the other side, where we invaded, the slope went down, went into deep water. And we got to the delivery ship, we had to climb up the rope ladder to get back aboard. That's what I remember about that.
Was it hard climbing back up?
No, it was always harder to get up than it was down. And I'll tell you, I'd lost about 20 pounds on that island.
Just getting ready to ask.
Yeah, I was pretty thin, I'll tell you. I had my stomach, I still think I had ulcers that day because every time I eat, I have a knot in my stomach.
Could you even eat much at all? Was your stomach shrunk so much, or?
Well, like I say, it was always, the first part was K rashes, but that was only for about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days. And then they got C rations, that's the cans. You know, they basically lived on C rations all the time I was there. Other than that one time I got the donuts, that's a highlight. Oh man, I'll tell you.
What kind of, were they glazed donuts?
Oh, I can't remember. They were just, I think, fried donuts. I don't think they were glazed. They may have had sugar on them, I don't know. But they were good.
Yeah.
Anything outside of a can would have been good in those days.
Okay.
That was one of the, I guess if you want to count it, happy day, that was it.
A happy moment.
Oh my.
So, you guys got on the LCI, then where did they ship you guys to? Was there like kind of
Well, see, this is where I told you. Originally, we were told that we we're going to go back to Guam. Guam is below Saipan and Tinian. Guam was a big island, had a big air base and everything. But for some reason, we heard that we weren't going there because something about the water supply or something. So they brought us all the way back to the island of Hawaii, back up on the big island, back to Camp Tarawa.
Yeah.
And I told you about, now the first time we went up on the sugarcane narrow gauge railroad to Hanukkah, and then we took us by truck. Well, this time they loaded us in 6-bys. And if I recall, we went up over the military road. I told you that they had made a road over the lava flow. They had graded, and it was nothing but lava flow for mile after mile. That's from the volcano erupting. So we went back to Camp Tarawa, and then they started bringing replacement units in to build our division back to full strength. And with all of our equipment and everything, most of it was destroyed or left on Iwo Jima. I understand that they didn't even bring back a tank that I know of because tanks were destroyed pretty much. They were there to get those equipment back and everything. It was such a much of a job. I told you one day I was very close to this one. Tank was moving up to, there was a cave it was getting a lot of fire from. And the guys couldn't knock it down. They'd call for this tank. He come up to almost, he kind of come around a bend like, and just as he got about into position, boy, I never heard the awfulest explosion. He had a landmine, and it blew the tread or the track off the tank. But he was in such a position, he could sweep that turret around. He still fired into that cave, which is the objective. But the tank, it was inactive because you blew the track off it. They couldn't move.
Wow.
And the guys come out of that, there's a escape hatch in the bottom. I saw these guys coming out of the bottom. This one guy was holding his ears for all his work, because I can imagine inside that thing, and had my gun off, he must have got a real jar. So that's one thing, after seeing those tanks, I didn't want any part of being in them things.
Oh, I can imagine.
I know if I followed those tanks up, they had a counterweight. I don't know how many 100-pound weight. It was counterweight for the turn, the gun. You could see where a shell had been fired. Those things that go in that soft iron, I don't know, for several inches. You can see where the Japanese apparently shot at the tank. I don't know what fire, but I remember seeing those where those bullets penetrate, because the counterweights were soft iron. They were, armor piercing would go through there. Where on the front, those were shaped that they would cause a bullet to ricochet on them. And of course, those guys had a little thing they'd look at, But I don't know what it must have been like when they fired that 75 millimeter inside that thing, because that tank would, when they fired that, the tank would actually, you see it kind of raise up from the concussion of it, or the explosion of the ship.
So where were you at when you found out the first one, or you found out the war ended? What can you take us to that sequences?
Well, we were back at Camp Tarawa on the Big Island, Hawaii, and we had been refitted. Our division had brought back to full fighting strength, and we were actually getting ready to load ship for Operation Olympic, which was the actual invasion of Japan. So about that time, I can't remember where I was at or coincide with the date. I think the first atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima was on September the 6th, 1945. And I think the one that dropped on Nagasaki was 2 days later. I think it was September the 8th. I could be wrong on that. But after those, it was a while before Japan would surrender. In fact, they had to do a vast 29 bombing of Tokyo to convince the government to head. Well, it wasn't Tojo didn't make it. It was Emperor Hirohito. He was the Lord, the God over everything. He was the one they looked to. And he finally saw the devastation, the loss of life. He said they would surrender. So then we went on. Of course, we had to go from Hawaii all the way over to Kyushu, Japan. You know, those transports, we were pretty slow. I don't recall too much about the trip, and I don't recall the exact day we got there, but when we went on Kyushu up to a place called Sasebo, which was their a naval training base, something like Annapolis we have here, and that's where we went in. We would have landed there, but we were right in there for occupation duty. One of the things that we had to do was to destroy any coastal guns or any artillery or things that would be a defensive measure. Now the big coastal guns that they had, those were those, I don't know whether they're 15, 16 inch. The way we destroyed them was we couldn't do anything, but the fellows that were in the certain groups took acetylene torches, would have oxygen acetylene, and they would score the breach so bad that they could not receive a shell or detonate one. And that was the only thing was done immediately to them. I understand later they were dismembered later on. And then of course along the coast, one thing I remember was really opened my eyes to how tragic that invasion would have been for everybody. They had what they call picket boats in these caves along the ocean, and they were back in, they were actually suicide boats, and the kamikaze driver would drive one of those boats, and they had a citric acid warhead on them. And what they would do, they were instructed that when landing craft came, whether they were an LCI or an LCV or whatever type landing craft, they would head toward that craft and they would explode. And it was an LCI, there might be as many as 40 or 50 men aboard. And this was a measure that we faced before we would have landed. And then I were told that even the Japanese, they were very suicidal. They felt from their religion that if they would die in the service of the emperor, that they would go to what they believed was their heaven. But if they rejected it and surrendered, that they would not have that eternal reward that they were taught to believe in. But even I understand, even some of the children were told to use charges to go under around tanks and things and blow themselves up, pretty much on the same way that the terrorists are doing today. But after seeing all these things that we faced, I want to say to you today that dropping the atomic bomb was one of the greatest assets in the survival that we had in the Second World War. The atomic bomb was criticized by many people because it took so many civilian lives, not only women, children, all that. But as I am here today, I know that even though there was all these people killed, had we not attacked Japan, we would have suffered. If we had attacked, we would have suffered tremendous casualties, because I saw all the suicidal equipment they had. Instead of thousands of lives being taken, I'm sure there would have been millions of lives on both sides, not only American lives, but also Japanese life. I know a lot of people criticize Harry Truman to give orders to drop the atomic bomb, but I think it was one of the greatest decisions made in the Second World War, because, as I've told you, the cost would have been far beyond what human imagination would tell us. So we went in there for occupation duty, and as we were there, we were ordered to destroy and take care of all defense equipment, because we knew not what might happen, but that was our order, so we would totally annihilate them as far as the fighting force was concerned. I remember in Sasebo there was even submarines in the pins down there in the caves that could have been sent out later to attack our shipping and landing craft had we so got to that point. And then I saw in the coves they had some of their cruisers and other ships that were docked, and they were abandoned there, but they would have been used in any effort to invade Japan.